Hello, 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 and welcome to the Cornfield. I am Jamie Beeman. So I'd love to introduce to you Mr. Kevin Ray. And Kevin Ray he's an auteur. He's a generative theater artist, director, producer. He's creating his own works. He is a teaching artist, and we're going to talk about what that means in the theater, what it means to be a teacher and to be a working artist at the same time. And we're going to talk about the work that he's been doing, but we're also going to talk about his collision with DEI and as a teaching artist in an organization and what the impacts of that have been. But I want to talk about all the good creative stuff. We've been wasting stuff waiting to record, and I don't want to waste another moment. So, Mr. Kevin Ray, welcome to the Cornfield.
Thank you so much for having me, and also congratulations on the show. It's really exciting that there are so many people who have come out and done shows where people can actually talk. You know, this is how we learn things, by having conversations, and sometimes having conversations about things we disagree about. I think that is one of the most difficult things about this ideology that I think the term that I prefer that people use is critical social justice activism. I think
Yes.
A big part of critical social justice activism is shutting down conversations so that people can't have them. And so then we're not able to get answers because we're just being shut down and we can't have conversations with each other, which is particularly terrible in the arts, because what you want, and particularly in theater, because theater is a collaborative art form. We have to collaborate with other artists to make theater. And you can't do that if you don't have trust. If we all have to walk around because we have a critical social justice activist who is policing rehearsal, waiting for somebody to make a microaggression, waiting for someone who forgets to do some type of protocol that somebody thinks is really important and they don't do it. You know, this is really corrosive to the arts, and it's everywhere. And that people who believe in this ideology have the misguided notion that they are in a position to make other people feel discomfort. That when other people do feel discomfort, that is evidence that their methods are working.
You captured this. This is something I'm going to direct people to this. I don't want to spend a great deal of time on this, but it was. I don't mean to interrupt you, but this is directly connected to the thing that.
Well,
that
you know what
me...
we can talk about that would be also directly connected to this discomfort is a Canadian educator named Richard Bilkstow.
Yes, I wrote an essay for Substack about him.
Yeah, for people who don't know, Richard Bilkstow was a Canadian educator who had over 20 years of service working in the education field. He attended a diversity, equity, and inclusion workshop offered by his employer. At this workshop, the woman who was leading the workshop, whose name is Kiki Ojo-Thompson, she asserted that Canada was more racist than the United States, and the idea was that they were going to be teaching this to children. Richard Bilkstow on this Zoom call, I think very gently pushed back on this idea. You know, as we were saying before, conversations get shut down very, very quickly in the context of either critical social justice or diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is kind of a subset policy of that ideology. And, you know, when he gave some examples and some reasons why he felt that Canada was not more racist than the United States. And what Kiki Ojo-Thompson did was she used something that's sometimes referred to as standpoint epistemology, meaning I know things because of you may have heard the term lived experience, or I know things because of my
identity. The name of my nightclub act, which is slightly satirically political. It's called Lived Experience. As Douglas Murray says, what other kind of experience is there?
Yes.
But go ahead.
So far, no one's ever been able to explain to us what dead experience is. So
I don't know. I guess we'll find out on the other side.
Yeah. Yeah, so what she did was she shut down this conversation by asking him. She said to him, "Are you in your whiteness trying to tell me how things are for Black people?"
Yeah,
Um, at that point, that did shut down the conversation. That scared him, and then that was. Except at the end of it, she did talk about that we took. She said we took out the weed whacker today.
yeah. And she
Um,
was chuckling. She's giggling. I read about this in my essay. She's like, well, I couldn't have lucked out better than to have. And basically, she was like, this is going to be our scapegoat. She stopped referring to him as a human. She called
yeah.
him a weed that needed to be weed whackered, and she called him whiteness, and persecuted this man to his unfortunate
Well,
death.
what happened was there was a second diversity, equity, and inclusion training, and
Yeah,
Richard attended the second training. And at this training, Kiki Ojo Thompson wanted to talk about the example of resistance that had occurred at the
right.
previous session. And when she did that, all of Richard's colleagues who were also on this Zoom call participated in a public shaming.
Yeah,
And they all started coming forward and criticizing him.
yeah.
Uh, Now, I've seen this in uh, education context before. You have adults who want to be in a position of the good student. They want to show Kiki Ojo Thompson that they are on board, that they are participating, that they understand.
Because they don't want to be in her sights, in her crosshairs, as Richard was clearly at this time.
Well, I mean, I think it's a combination of people feeling like they are doing something good. They think they're being good students. They think they're being good citizens by acknowledging um, what they may perceive as systemic racism or what they may perceive as ongoing problems. But
That's
there's also
different than this. That's not a
yeah,
natural, that this kind of torturing somebody. And if something, see, my take on this is that I don't want to interrupt your flow. This is such an important story for people, if you're interested in these things, to really understand what happened to this man. But, it's this thing of, well, they get you this way. Like none of us are for racism. We're all anti-racist. That's not what that means. It's all of that manipulation and, getting up and saying, yeah, I did have advantages as a white person in my growing up and I understand. And I've said this in show business. I've seen tokenism. I've seen bullying and racist bullying. I have in my time in the profession. That's not what this is. If it's just about saying, yeah, we understand this, and then we have a conversation about how this manifests and what it is one thing. But if you question it at all, if you push back in the gentlest of terms, and this man was very, very gentle and very, very reasoned, you get set up in the town square, in the stocks.
yeah. I mean, the most salient thing I heard about this was from Eric Weinstein, who said, "If I can't tell you, I think you're wrong, then we are not equals."
Mm,
So if I can't tell you, I think you're wrong because you're using standpoint epistemology,
mm-hmm.
then we are not equals. And there's only really two reasons for that. I'm doing that because I think you're beneath me, or I'm doing that because I'm afraid of you. And neither one of these are good things.
It's bullying. It's where
And
bullying
so,
comes from.
exactly. And so, all of these people who are so afraid to tell Kiki Ojo Thompson that she was wrong, not only did they harm Richard Bilkstow, but they harmed Kiki Ojo Thompson as well. Because for the rest of her life, whether she's acknowledging it now or not, and on social media, she's not acknowledging it. She's claiming to be the
No,
victim
she's
here.
doubled down.
But on some level, either she already knows now or she will know that she played a part in this man's death. The
Yeah,
bullying that occurred as a result of these diversity, equity, and inclusion workshops, which were anything but inclusive, played a part in this man's death.
yes.
So yes, Kiki Ojo Thompson played a big role in it, but all of the cowards who didn't pull her aside,
Right.
she probably wouldn't listen to Richard Bilkstow because, in her mind, she's the facilitator of this workshop, and
Right.
everybody else is there to receive her wisdom. But I'm sure people were in her sphere that she would listen to, and they could have pulled her aside and said, Kiki, I understand that this is coming from a good place. I understand you have an idea about the change that you want to see in the world, but we don't achieve that change by bullying, shaming people based on identity characteristics. We don't do that. That's not going to work. And we don't do it to educators. These are already people who are on our team. These are already people who want the best thing for young people. What I've seen over and over again with people committed to critical social justice activism is they attack the person nearest to them who deviates anyway in the slightest way from whatever it is that they've decided. And the ideology kind of changes like the weather. Like, it'll be this thing today, since 2020, it's sort of vacillated between, first it was critical race theory, then we kind of morphed into gender ideology. A lot of people are expecting the next thing is going to be either mental health or climate change. But anybody who even asks a question about it, they just get hammered in a horrible way.
Well, I think she felt she had succeeded. I mean, she was almost gleeful that she had such a perfect whipping boy. And I have to say, I think that there are other factors here. I don't think these people are just Bolshevik. I think they're very well informed of who's going to be there. These were required training sessions for people in principal positions, superintendent positions, people at that level of the education system. I think she knew who he was. I think he had already been somewhat critical publicly about some of these ideas. And I think that I know this from my experience, and I don't say this in an egotistical way. When I came up against this stuff in the workplace, I was the most crafted, educated, authoritative, white, seasoned professional in the room of a certain age. And that's where they want to go first. If they can rip down the most confidently authoritative, educated, crafted white guy in the room, it puts the fear of God into everyone else in the room. It's like, you will not go there. And the fact that these people got up and testified against him, I was watching, I revisited a movie called The Red Violin. I don't know if you remember that movie from the early 90s. It's a fabulous movie that I highly, highly, highly recommend. It's a film about the journey that this very rare and amazing violin from the 17th century goes through its various owners and various hands throughout its life, and Samuel L. Jackson, and just amazing. But one of the lives this violin has is in China during the Cultural Revolution. And there is a scene where a man is brought in by thugs in a group, and he's a musician, he's a music person, and he has a violin, and they're trying to get rid of the vestiges of Western culture, including classical music and these instruments. And he is publicly humiliated and made to throw the violin on the fire. And had not this other character, who secretly is a violinist, stepped in on his behalf, they would have tortured him. They would have done something to him physically. And it felt really that energy. That's the energy. It's very cold. It's very hard-line, authoritative. It's about making everyone around that person run for the hills, or at least appear to support what's going on. And I want to say, go ahead.
I haven't seen that movie. A movie that I've been watching a lot of classic black and white movies these days. And partly just to catch up on things that, this is a movie and I've just never seen it and I finally want to see it. The movie that I watched just this week was Judgment at Nuremberg. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie.
Yes. Well, I used to impersonate Marlene Dietrich, so yeah.
She's wonderful
powerful
in the movie. And
she is.
Watching it hit me so hard because the story of these judges explaining why they went along with this when they knew it was wrong, and how it started as a small thing. This ideology, this does not lead to a good place.
No. It
This
doesn't.
does not lead to a good place. And anybody who knows anything about Rwanda, can tell you that what they did in the schools is that they would make the kids stand up and announce who was Hutu and who was Tutsi. This is why I don't participate in any of this white privilege, white tears, white supremacy, any of this stuff. I am not trafficking in any of this ideology. I will not, James. I, I work in all kinds of classrooms. Never, ever, James, will I get up in front of a classroom of children in New York City and tell those kids that I was born with some kind of privilege that they will never, ever be able to get and never have access to. No matter what they do, no matter how hard they try, I will never do that to any child. That is horrible. That is awful.
So true. So true.
That is why getting people to say this stuff is heinous. Don't participate in it.
Well, I think, Kevin, boy, do I feel your passion. I do. And actually,
can you imagine, James? Can you imagine looking at those kids and saying that to them?
No.
Because that's what's getting said in the professional development workshops.
Wow.
Why would you ever say that to another human being?
Yeah.
Don't we all have the capacity and the potential to achieve, to at least try to achieve? We're not all going to be astronauts and go to the moon. We're not.
It's true.
We're not all going to be the star player in the NBA. We're not. But we can try. And when you're going to teach teachers an ideology that is about deciding, a lot of this comes from an ideology that a lot of teachers are taught called pedagogy of the oppressed. Pedagogy of the oppressed is an ideology that was created by a Brazilian educator named Paulo Freire. And Freire's idea is that all of society is divided between the oppressors and the oppressed. And it's a nonstop battle between the two groups. And it is the teacher's job to go into the classroom and wake the students up, to raise their consciousness to understand that these students are being oppressed by using something called generative themes. And so when the kids are awakened to their oppression, the idea is that they will be liberated and that they will be a revolution and that they will overthrow the oppressors and they will become the new oppressors and the cycle starts all over again, which is good for Paulo Freire because he can sit on the outside and he'll always have a job of
this is what I've been saying
against each other.
Exactly. And I've been saying that as long as these DEI people, I mean, they're tenured deans of diversity in universities and colleges, they have a job forever. I mean, as long as that bureaucracy, that multi-billion-dollar industry of amateurs, psychologists, torturer, manipulators, as long as they're making money, they have no incentive. They're not there to fix racism. They're not there to get rid of it. They even say that. D'Angelo says that the work's never done. You'll never be done. I mean, it's, for me, and I think you feel the same, I was bullied as a kid. From first grade on, I had to leave high school because there were death threats. And I went to a school called Simon's Rock, which was full of brilliant misfits. And my roommate there was John McWhorter, as my viewers will know. God bless him. He's an amazing man. But we were 16 years old together. But I had to escape it because I had a target on my back from the minute I started school. I was small and pretty and girly and like a little gay boy. But it was the same situation. Nobody wanted to be me. I was taking it all because nobody stood up for me. No one. And I know what that feeling is. So when I encountered that in the workplace a year ago, in the place of theater.
Well, let me tell you something. When I was a teaching artist for several years. I think I started as a teaching artist in 2002.
And what does a teaching artist do, just for our viewers our listeners
who have no idea? So
I don't know.
A teaching artist is different than a classroom teacher. So teaching artists typically it's kind of a niche industry in New York City because we have a lot of cultural institutions. So in New York City, cultural institutions like a theater company or a museum or an orchestra or an opera or any kind of cultural institution will partner with a school to send an arts professional into the school to work with the kids as a visitor. So you might be doing something called a residency, where you'll go into the school and you'll be there every Monday for 10 weeks and you'll work with 4 classes of second graders. And let's say it's a theater project. And ideally what you're doing is you're supporting the curriculum that the kids are already learning. So oftentimes with second graders, they'd be doing a unit on poetry. So we time it out that I would be going into the classroom at the time of the year that they'd be doing poetry. And I'd work with the whole class as a group to create a kind of choral speaking and movement piece that, and then we'd have 4 classes and each class would come up and present their poem. So we're reinforcing what the classroom teacher is already doing. So they're already learning about rhyme. They're already learning about different styles of poem. And we're not teaching them how to be actors or how to get into show business. We're using the arts as a way to support what the classroom content already is. Now, one of the things that's great about it is that you're visiting when their classroom teacher is already there. So you're sort of partnering with the classroom teacher. But even then, working with children is challenging. The challenge I thought was really exciting. You're taking everything that you know as an artist and trying to find a way to break it down to make it fun and engaging for kids. And so I'll tell you, James, I came to New York City in 1991. I went to undergraduate to be a musical theater performer. In the 90s, I did 2 musicals that toured around the United States. I worked regionally. I got into my late 20s, early 30s. I wasn't working as much because I didn't look like a kid anymore. So I was struggling a little bit on that end, and I was sort of looking for something. I wasn't looking to stop performing, but what happened was I started getting work as a teaching artist, and I would go into classrooms. And for audiences who don't know, it used to be, it's not like this so much anymore, but it used to be when actors auditioned, you would go into a room and they'd open the door for you and they'd say your name and you'd go in the room and there'd be people sitting behind a table and they will have been having sat there for 6 hours already, 7 hours already. They're the casting director or the assistant to the casting director, or maybe if you're lucky, it's the actual director of the show or the actual choreographer. But by and large, they're looking to get a job done, which is they're trying to cast the show as quickly as possible. And if you're not what they're looking for, they know that pretty much right away. So oftentimes when you're walking in those rooms, it's not the happiest, joyous feeling of your life. You have to find some joy in your performance and kind of ignore what's happening behind that table. But I would say 9 times out of 10, when I walked into those audition rooms, no one was happy to see me. There was one day I had been working as a teaching artist, I think 2 years. I was teaching 4th graders out in Far Rockaway. I got to the door, I opened the door, the entire classroom, all the kids turned and they went, "Oh, it's me." And I thought, Kevin, wait a minute. Usually when doors are opened like that, people aren't excited to see you. These kids are excited to see you. The classroom teacher is excited to see you. Go where it's warm. Go where it's warm. And so, James, you know what? I committed to this field because I enjoyed the work. I enjoyed spending time with kids. I enjoyed trying to figure out what is the best way that we can support kids to be expressive, to use their imagination, to learn about theater. That's hard to do. I did not get into this business, James, to use the arts as a Trojan horse, to smuggle in a divisive and cruel ideology. That's not why I did this. And what started happening around 2015, I'd say, is that a lot of the professionals in the teaching artist field, the arts education field, changed the game. So if you weren't on board with this, you were in big trouble.
This is troubling to me. My parents were educators and my mother ran the Boston Children's Theater for several years, and several of the kids who she took under her wing back then and who I worked with as an actor and a teacher went on to have way better careers than mine. You don't know. I mean, I did a scene for a film with Melissa McCarthy. It's a remake of Bernard and the Genie. And I was in this scene with Papa Essiedu's amazing British actor, and Danae Benton, who I always thought was amazing. And I was asked by a friend of mine to say hello to her for him. And he was her high school English teacher. I mean, a drama teacher in Florida. And when I said his name, she went, Mr. Whip. She cried. She became 16 and cried. And we took a selfie for him. He made her, he facilitated for her the path of her life by encouraging her, by inspiring her. He doesn't do that work anymore. And I know he's had struggles with that. He's in a different field altogether now. But when I told him that, man, there is nothing better than that. So really, you're there to be a force for encouragement and love and creativity and bravery, courage.
Well, yes. I mean, I think the main goal is not really to inspire people to go on to careers in the arts. The main goal is to walk into a classroom of children, sometimes it's teenagers, and to say, hey, we're going to try to do something, and I'm going to support you to get through the whole thing, and we're going to do it.
Yes.
And the fact that we started, even if the show stinks, who cares?
Right.
We did it. We
Yes.
worked. And I think what's really great about some of the training I received is how to constantly reframe and focus. What is it that we did well? What did we achieve? And being
Who
able to
inspired
assess
you
things.
as an actor? Well, you were an actor. You still are an actor. Once you're an actor, you're always an actor. But who inspired you in terms of your approach to educating kids using theater? Was there anybody in particular, or because you do generative theater, which I think I've always called devised theater. I think it's the same thing where you working with a group of performers, and sometimes, well, you do. We're going to get into what you do because it's just so amazing. All the different elements you bring in, different kinds of talent, creative voices, all merging together to create a thing. Is there, because you're saying that you're taking a poem, you're creating some kind of an expression, a piece out of that. Who inspired that in you?
I had a lot of different influences. I was really lucky in 2002. I met a guy who was looking for teaching artists. His name was Scott Lawhead. He worked for an organization that doesn't exist anymore, but it was called Periwinkle Theater for Youth. And Scott had been a teaching artist for a very long time. And he took me under his wing and he mentored me. And he had actually come up with this idea of the combining the poem. I don't know where he got it from, but that had been a long-standing program that they had been doing. Okay. So that was how and there is a school, I started back in, 2002. There's a school in the Bronx that I still go to today because I met that school through Scott. I learned most of what I learned about teaching artists that I think is of value from him. Unfortunately, between 2002 and 2008, I was asked a lot about what are you going to do? Because, the thing about teaching artist work is it's basically gig work. On Monday, I'm working for organization A at school 35. And on Tuesday, I'm working for organization B at school 8. And on Wednesday, I'm working at a different school for another organization. So it's putting together a schedule of part-time hourly work for different organizations at different pay rates with no insurance coverage, with no retirement. So I was young, I was in my late 20s, early 30s, and I wasn't really thinking, what are you going to do with your life? I had just come off, trying to be a working actor and sort of transition into, no, actually, I think I can make my living doing this.
Not really making a living doing that.
Say, how are you thinking about getting a master's degree? And I said, well, I don't, maybe. And they were like, Kevin, if you really should get a master's degree because that's really going to open doors for you so you can get a job. And I did have a dream of teaching at the college level because when I was a college student, it was a really magical time for me. You were talking before about being bullied for being gay in elementary and high school. I came to New York City to go to college in the early 90s. So it was a hugely liberating time for me as a young gay man, but also a time for me to really focus and really try to understand what is theater and how to act. I was really invested in it. So I think I had this idea in my mind that I would find other young people like that if I could get a job teaching at the college level. So I started looking around to see who had master's degrees programs. And I did find a master's degree program in 2008. And James, I should have known. I should have known, and I was told right away. It actually happened on the first day of the orientation. One of the professors. So, I was telling you before about this book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed.
Okay.
On the first day of this master's degree program that I got myself into, and I thought I had really achieved something really wonderful and fantastic. This was a brand new program that the university was turning out. And one of the professors at the orientation, he looked at all of us and she said, there were professors at this university who didn't want us to start this program. They said we were a cult. Huh. And I was sitting there thinking, like, how could this be a cult? I don't understand. Now, I had never been to graduate school before. I had left undergraduate in 1995. This is 2008. I'd been away for a long time, but I didn't really, so I had really had no grasp that I was being indoctrinated into an ideology. Because when this is the book that you're presented with, and there is
they gave you that book.
Well, you had to buy it, but we read this. I mean, you had to buy a lot of books in graduate school.
But that was the foundation. Okay, but that was the foundation.
Yes. So Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And so this ties a little bit what you're asking about devised theater. Pedagogy of the Oppressed and devised theater, they do have an overlap because it is about Pedagogy of the Oppressed is looking at oppressor-oppressed groups in relation to power dynamics. So what they're trying to identify is who has power, how do we get that power so we can wield it? There is a piece of devised theater that started back in the 1960s that sort of started with the postmodernist movement in art, which is different than postmodernism in philosophy. Postmodernism in art is more about taking the artwork apart into its component pieces.
Right.
Whereas postmodernist philosophy it's a whole different thing. But in the 60s, when devised theater sort of began as the seeds, they were looking at how can we share power as a collective of artists, and how can we create theater together with looking at different
like Peter Brook.
Hierarchies.
Like Theater of Cruelty, his whole project that developed into Marat Sade.
Still sit in the seat of the director
in the 60s,
which means that
England.
There is still some hierarchy present. It's not a complete like a commune, there's a variety of approaches to how you can make devised theater. But that is kind of the seeds of it are around there. But, I started this graduate program and I didn't know I was being indoctrinated into a cult. And so it's an ideological cult. It's not the same kind of a cult, like, Charles Manson, but it is an ideological cult. It's a worldview, and you're not allowed to disagree with it. And if you disagree with it, there will be punishment.
So you studied to be a teaching artist. A lot of these ideas were part and foundation of the training that you received. But your actual experience of them in practice, was this something that were the people who trained you witnessing or judging or guiding your interactions with students, or did you just have to take this stuff and combine it with what you knew as an actor, a professional actor, into the schools and see what you could make of it?
Yeah, so the stuff that I learned in graduate school, the first time I went to graduate school, the methods would work because sometimes we would have teenagers actually come into the graduate school and we could work with them. But that's a kind of a false context because you have a lot of adults around. You have way more, like the ratio of adults to kids is much larger than it is when you're in a classroom and it's just you and the teacher. So when you've got a lot of adults around, the teenagers' behavior is a little more on point than it normally would be. So a lot of the activities would work beautifully at graduate school, but then when you would try to go out to, like, you know, a school that you'd be working with, the activities would fall apart and you'd go like, well, wait a minute, how come it worked in graduate school, but it doesn't work in the real world? That would frequently happen. Somebody had written a thesis paper that we reviewed because we were all going to have to write thesis paper. And it was a beautifully written thesis paper, but it was about how nothing worked. Nothing worked. And it's because they're putting way too much emphasis on promoting ideology and not enough emphasis on how do we engage, how do we get these kids participating. It's just too much of the ideological junk that the kids don't want or need. And I feel for parents right now, because parents have no idea what their teachers have been taught. The teachers who are teaching their kids, they don't know what those teachers have been taught. And they don't know. So for example, you know, they might be getting a notice saying, you know, a teaching artist is coming to your school to do a workshop on such and such. They have no idea that teaching artist was trained in both pedagogy of the oppressed and its evil twin theater of the oppressed. They have no idea that teaching artist is in there looking at their kids going, I can tell this half of the room, these boys and girls over here, these boys and girls are oppressors. And I can tell that by the color of their skin. And these boys and girls over here, they are the oppressed. And I can tell that because of the color of their skin. And what I need to do as an educator is I need to do something called equity. And I need to make sure everything is fair. So equity means that I'm going to have to make sure I take things from these kids, and I'm going to have to make sure I give it to these kids. I mean, if that's how you're trained, Jamie, how are you going to do anything different in the classroom?
What does it have to do with anything? I mean, what story are you telling? What piece are you working on? What poem? What play? I mean, look, it goes back to what you said at the beginning so forcefully, so powerfully, is how are you supposed to, as a middle-aged white guy, go into an inner city school full of mostly kids of color and start calling them the oppressed as part of your visiting artist treat for the day or the whatever? It's appalling. Well, the prospect of it to me is appalling.
They don't say that out loud. So it's what they're taught. So it's what's in their approach to the room. So they're creating the lesson plan with this. So you'll never hear that out loud. This is why.
But they're creating an environment.
Right. So when we went through this period where people were saying, they're not teaching critical race theory. They're not teaching critical race theory. So in a sense, literally, they were correct. But these people are trained in it. So they are doing critical race theory.
It's manipulative. Yeah.
Yes. Or they are doing pedagogy of the oppressed on your kids. But, you know, you won't know that. You'll just think your kids are getting a theater workshop.
Look, you create your own theater, and I really want to talk about this because I think that an important part of our conversation is going to be about how do you create your own independent work so that you don't have to abide by or incorporate the rituals, the parameters, the rules, the objectives of a particular thing. I mean, I think around the time I first connected with you, I was doing this devised theater thing about trans masculinity. And it was a group of non-binary trans men, this whole thing. And I had my first real taste of, I mean, we spent half the first day doing community agreements on a whiteboard about what you could say and couldn't say and what you want and how this person was sensitive to that. And I thought, how are we supposed to mix it up here and like do what I mean, I went to graduate school 2003, 2004. I was 38 years old. I was at the Shakespeare Theater in Washington, D.C. The things that we did where we were a pile of bodies in sweatpants rolling around on each other, the kinds of really vulnerable, like emotional, physical work we did, we couldn't do that today. It would take a week before we would get to step one of whatever we were agreeing to, how much we could handle. I don't understand how actors became part of something that is antithetical to the creative and the moral courage it takes to be an actor. It makes no sense to me. At all. How are you supposed to work? I don't get it.
Yeah, there's a lack of trust. So there's a lack of trust. If you have to do community engagement or community agreements that are that detailed, that's a real lack of trust walking into the room. And that
but
is
they
also
see it as just basics. This is the basics before we start to work. They don't see it as neurotic or anything. They just are like, okay, this, before we can do anything, we have to do this.
They think they're being good people in doing that. I mean, I think that's, again, back to this idea of pedagogy of the oppressed. It's framing the whole world as there are good people and there are bad people. And the good people do these kind of extreme community agreements because that's the good thing to do. And we can identify the bad people because they are the ones who resist and they need to be re-educated. They're old. They don't understand.
Okay, well, this was what I came up against last summer doing this musical up in Massachusetts. I got to tell you, that's not my job, okay? My job is not to come in there and be your target for your activism today to educate me. I'm here on a contract to do a part in a play. This is one of the things we've always had to parse as theater people, as actors, is this how we stay in a professional lane while doing all of this work that's so personal, that's so invested emotionally, that requires so much vulnerability and trust. How do we do that? And how we did that was you don't give another actor a note. You don't pile on to another actor in the workplace with impunity. You treat people with mutual respect. There are certain protocols. I was talking to Michael Koster about his wonderful book, The Stage Actor's Handbook. And I was like, he has this wonderful, wonderful wonder about all of that. But I was like, you realize that a lot of this stuff is considered, patriarchal, white, oppressive culture. I just do not understand, unless the play we're devising or creating or interpreting is about the hierarchy of the oppressed. What does this have to do with the collaborative process?
I can tell you why this might be showing up. Like, I can give you one example of why this might be showing up. So imagine you went to a college to get your undergraduate theater degree.
Yes.
And at the college, on the bathroom door of every bathroom was a sign for the bias response team. And if you heard anything in a classroom that upset you or offended you, you can call the bias response team and you can report that teacher and you can get that teacher in trouble. So if you're learning that all through your undergraduate degree, and then you graduate and you go into a rehearsal, you're going to be expecting to want to know who's the bias response team and who do I have to turn in if I feel upset by anything.
Right. And now the union has become that parent that you can call our union.
When I was in graduate school the first time, I used to keep hearing this. I used to hear this term a lot over and over again: re-traumatize. So seeing certain things on stage would re-traumatize audience members. So we'd have to think about, like, if we do this, is it going to re-traumatize anybody? What's really frightening about this ideology is it's also trafficking in a layperson's understanding of psychodynamic therapy. They think that they understand something about how the mind and your emotions work. And they think, and again, this idea that that their workshop can cause you discomfort and that is somehow appropriate. That's psychological manipulation.
Yeah, it's about reprogramming people through either through intimidation or through emotional, psychological manipulation, whatever that is. I don't understand the thing. I don't know about you, but I had a classical theater education. The Greeks invented theater for the purpose of catharsis. They invented debate. They invented, that argument on stage in the public forum where people could engage with something outside of themselves imaginatively, and the emotional release was part of it. And now we've got to warn people that Romeo and Juliet involves suicide. right?
Well, we don't have to. I think some people are demanding
Yeah.
that certainly. Yeah.
So you're creating your own work. And I really want to turn people on to this. You are doing what you're calling generative theater. Am I right? In it's like devised. Is it like the same?
Yeah, I mean, devised, it's a tricky term because it means different things to different people.
Okay.
And
Okay.
so, when I'm trying to write grant applications, I'm trying to be as clear as I possibly can to explain what it is that I'm doing. So sometimes I know if I say devised work, that's going to require some explaining because they're going to want to know, well, what kind of devised work are you doing?
Oh,
What happened was, as part of the work that I was doing with young people, I learned how. So here's a positive thing that came out of my experience with pedagogy of the oppressed. When they're talking about generative themes, what they're partly talking about is how can you hit on something that the students might understand that comes from their world. So when you devise with young people, you can work with maybe a group of 6 or 8 teenagers and ask them some questions about what their understanding of a certain topic might be, and
right.
start getting ideas from them. And then you look at those ideas and say, okay, well, which ones of these can we act out? Or which ones of these can we, if we can't act it out, can we make frozen pictures of it? Can we put these 3 frozen images together? If after we have, can we do a movement to take these 3 frozen images and make them into a kind of dance? Can everybody have one line of dialogue? And now it's kind of like a, snapshot, Rorschach of our understanding of whatever this thematic topic was.
Yeah.
So I did that for, I think 7 years. I worked with an organization that worked with teenagers devising original theater based on themes. Um, I hit, I would say probably in about 2012, I hit a serious depression because it became clear to me that the master's degree that I had earned was, it is not what's considered a terminal degree. So
Mm-hmm.
not all master's degrees are alike. So a
Right.
PhD or an MFA, those are terminal degrees. What I had earned was called an MA degree, which is only 36 credit hours. And that degree is not terminal, which means you cannot get a full-time teaching job at a college or university. And I was probably a year out of graduate school. I was really lost. I didn't know what I was going to do. Between the fall of 2012 and I would say the spring, summer of 2014, I went through some really rough times. And I really
Yeah.
had a colleague of mine who I had gone to graduate school with. I one day I was like, I'm just mystified because the whole point of going to graduate school was to be able to get a better job. I cannot be a
Right.
teaching artist forever. And this person looked at me and said, oh, Kevin, I knew going to graduate school wasn't going to be able to get me a better job. I just did it for the personal fulfillment.
Oh, well,
I was devastated. I mean, Jamie, I spent months like crying on a therapist's couch because
I understand that.
I had lost, I really, by the summer of 2014, I really felt like I had lost everything. I really didn't know what I was going to do. And I went away that summer. I worked at a
Mm-hmm.
summer
It's
camp. I worked at a,
painful to, I imagine, very painful to transition out of a full-time pursuit of performing professionally and to get us to a certain level and then to shift gears so dramatically. That's hard enough. But then, you earn all of this experience and you put in all this time and money and only to feel like it didn't leave you with anything that you could build upon.
so here's what
I can,
happened.
yeah.
That summer, I went away. I was working at a summer theater camp, and I had done, before I got to the camp, uh, that I had been at this camp several years. And this particular year, they said, Kevin, nobody wants to do Shakespeare this summer. Are you interested in doing the Shakespeare play? And I said, well, I've never directed Shakespeare before. I think I might be better suited for either this play or this play or this play. And they said, Kevin, nobody's directing Shakespeare this summer. Is there a Shakespeare play you'd like to direct? And I was like, Twelfth Night, I'll do it. And then it just so happened. So then I worked with these teenagers and we did this production, Twelfth Night. It went very well. And it so happened that somebody else dropped out that summer and they were like, Kevin, can you stay? Can you do the second? And I said, yeah, but what am I going to do? They were like, how about another Shakespeare? And I ended up directing Macbeth. And I got to the end of that summer. I had a wonderful time doing both of those shows, and Macbeth is a really fun play to do with teenagers because
it must
the
be
spooky, scary,
violent.
Violent. They rented swords and we did an actual sword fight, which was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
We also worked with an amazing lighting designer that summer who was really good at using fog machines and was able to. We used tons of fog and used lighting to make the whole stage disappear. At one point, it was fantastic.
Ooh, nice.
I got to the end of that summer and I thought, what if, because I was learning through directing, first of all, I was scared to direct Shakespeare. I had never done it before. And then I went, wait a minute, if I can direct Shakespeare with teenagers.
Hello.
We were coming up with productions that had a kind of point of view. Like in that production of Macbeth, we decided to make the witches children because we were like, this could be really scary. And I thought,
like
wait
The
a
Shining.
minute. Yes. Maybe what I am is a theater director. So I'd gone from being an actor to being a kind of educator. And I thought, maybe what you are is a theater director. How am I going to do that? And it just so happened there was I needed to go back to get my second master's degree, and I did get a terminal degree. I got an MFA in theater directing. And what was great is when I got there is that because I had so much experience working with young people and looking at ways of how do you engage people in a process, that I didn't have to learn. We had a lot of experiences working with both the undergraduate and the graduate students at the school. I didn't have to learn how to work with people. It was more, learning some nuts and bolts of things that I had never had full experience with, like with, productions with young people. We're not totally in the world of design. We're not working with a lot of professional designers, but in this MFA program, there were also MFA designers. And the director of the program had a really great idea. The chair of the department had a great idea, which is put the directors and the designers in classes together because they're going to develop collaboration. So what happened was, while I was at graduate school, I met some incredible designers. Again, after I finished that degree, I was a little bit at sea. I was a little bit like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I was told, go out and network. And by this time, I'm in my 40s. And, now it's in 2018. So what the climate was. I would be going out and I would be doing interviews, and I could just tell the way people were looking at me. They would look at me and they would go, this guy's the last person we're ever even going to consider to give an opportunity to. We cannot give this guy an opportunity. He's the last. We can't. And I could sense that in the interviews. Then, because they're looking at your race, your gender.
I see. There's a priority being placed on other. Yeah.
It did happen. It happened during the pandemic that I went to an online meeting that was for directors. And the head of this organization was the only person on camera besides the head of the organization's assistant. And this was before George Floyd.
Right.
And people were asking questions and the questions were getting filtered. So the assistant would get the question and then give it to the director. So we couldn't see who was online. The first question that came through was, how is the organization going to set it up so that when the pandemic is over, white men can't direct anything anymore? And the head of the organization froze. And then the head of the organization said, I don't know what that question means. What's the next question? And my jaw hit the floor because I went,
Wow.
I know what that question means. That question means discrimination. And the answer to that question is, this organization does not discriminate because discrimination is illegal and we won't do it. But that's how frightened people are, James.
Well, or they think, and listen, I have heard myself say it, and I believe it. I do believe that there is look, it's very interesting. Perception is a very interesting thing. And to me, I'm seeing a flood of representation and diversity, particularly Afrocentric representation in the arts, in television, film, stage, Broadway, all over the place. And it's great. Here's the thing. People can't parse the two things. I liken this surge of particularly Black themes and Black artists being given more opportunity, more visibility. I liken that to the response that theater had to the AIDS epidemic in the early 90s when I came to the city around the time you did. Everything was gay. Angels in America and Love, Valor, Compassion and Kiss of the Spider Woman were all on Broadway at the same time. I was in a gay off-Broadway review at the Actors Playhouse in the Village. Like, my drag career took off because drag was everywhere. And I think this is a similar reaction to a sort of a national trauma, and it's a response.
James, I don't think there was one. I don't believe that there was one gay man that said, "How are we going to make it so that no heterosexual men can ever?"
No.
So I just don't want to conflate these two things.
I'm not.
What
I'm
this
just
idea
saying that
is about.
What people are seeing.
There's nothing wrong with.
The result that some people are seeing, because a lot of us, even within this industry, as you know, have a very peripheral awareness of what's going on. They don't see this. So I understand what you're saying, the caution. I think a lot of people in the industry going, yeah, but this is great. What's wrong with that? Because that plays right into the narrative. That innocent sort of like, yeah, but of course representation. Right. Of course I understand I won't get to work for a while as an old white guy. But they don't understand that what you're saying is absolutely true. But even good friends of mine who are Black would say, well, Kevin, there's no such thing as reverse racism.
So that's a perspective, but that's not what the law says, James.
Right.
The law is that you cannot discriminate based on protected class category. The law is you cannot discriminate based on race. You cannot discriminate based on sex. You cannot discriminate. I can go on with the list.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I'm sorry, but James, that person is not an attorney.
Right. Yes.
So they can have whatever opinion that they want.
A moral argument.
But the question is, I think this is why I think John McWhorter is correct.
Yes.
It's not tricky in the eyes of the law, James.
No, it's
what's
not.
Legal and what's not legal. There's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with saying we want to put up this kind of a show. There's nothing wrong with a director deciding, they want to make a diverse cast. That's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that. What is wrong is when you say you can't come in here because you are of X identity. That's a huge problem. I think the diversity is fantastic.
Of course.
And I also think that the majority of things that we're seeing, James, all has the same ideology. I think if you can get your work on stage, I think that's great. The theater has always been a place where there has been a plethora of different ideologies.
I agree.
Not all the same ideology.
No.
There was a theater festival, a downtown theater festival that prided itself on being uncensored. They had a show that they accepted into the festival, and the person who created the show, now I wouldn't have chosen to do this, but this artist chose to do it. This artist chose to make a statement that there are only two sexes, men and women. That's what that artist chose to do. Because that artist chose to do that, the show was canceled.
Sure.
Now, I think you should do the opposite. I think if people want to have a conversation about that, you should let them have the conversation.
And do a big talk back after. You don't shut the conversation
down. Because for all we know, that show stunk. And then the people who were opposed to it would have been thrilled because of this stinky show.
That's theater.
But
I don't
we'll
know if you remember. Do you remember the Julius Caesar that they did in at the Delacorte New York Shakespeare Festival in the park.
I refuse to go and see
with
that.
Trump.
I refuse
Okay.
to go to see that.
Well, it was Trump as Caesar. And my friend Tina Benko, wonderful actress, was playing Calpurnia, and they made her do it as Melania Trump with a Slovenian accent. And Elizabeth Marvel played Mark Antony in a tracksuit with a Southern accent. This, and it was just wretched. And like I was in a preview audience, and the audience was groaning. And the biggest problem I had with it was, if you want Caesar to die, there's no play. If Brutus doesn't have a moral conundrum about assassinating Caesar, but if you have a guy come out in a Trump comb-over wig and a red tie, I was like, no. And then what happened was it created this huge, like pro-Trump, like people storming the stage with signs and stopping their performance. And Oscar Eustis had the temerity to come out on stage at the Delacorte in front of a packed house in the press and defend the creative choice. Now, look, you should be able to do whatever shit you want to do. But right. I felt like that was indefensible. I really did. And it was the other side of the sort of bias being played out. It was a hit job on stage, and maybe it rose out of a certain amount of ire for the period. I think they chose the wrong play. Yeah, I mean, why not let somebody do their statement piece that pushes against? Why does it have to be erased? And I think that's cowardice. I think it's because this works. It's Bolshevik. It is. This works. Why should we have a conversation about this? Why should we encourage anybody to have a conversation about this when we can just shut it down? And they've got that down, especially the sort of gender wing of the alphabet people. They have that tactic well in hand. It's not as bad here as it is. I mean, what happened to Kelly J. Keane down in New Zealand, and people gluing themselves to the floor of the Oxford Union, and it's ridiculous. But it works. It works. It's intimidation. It's not persuasion, and that's why I always feel like there's only two results that can happen when something is allowed to go unfettered for any length of time. Either you turn into a communist regime, authoritarian state, or these people are stopped. They're stopped. And what's funny about it is, people say to me, "You're so brave to speak out," or whatever. I'm like, there's nothing brave about telling the truth. The only reason that I'm here having this conversation with you on this podcast thing that I'm doing, Kevin, is because people were telling me I wasn't allowed to have an opinion and I needed to be quiet because I'm white, gay, white, privileged.
Listen,
as soon as you tell me not to say something, you're screwed.
The only way you're going to find out if things are true is if you allow people to voice their opinions, and that you have all the opinions. Because you know what? It may be that you and I are speaking and we have a controversial opinion, but other people are listening.
Right.
Who are not in a position to be able to speak up. If you are, in a context where you've got a spouse and children that are counting on your paycheck, you're not going to be able to speak up in the workplace. You're going to have to go along with it. But, and I also, James, you brought up a point where you use the term reverse discrimination. And I think a lot of people don't understand that is a fiction, that there is no such thing. And that people don't understand, you and I, we were brought up. I don't know about racism. You, but I was brought up on Sesame Street and the Electric Company and Mr. Rogers. We were taught, that it is a diverse world. That you should be nice to everybody. So I think that there is kind of an impulse, it wouldn't be nice to notify human resources that I'm being discriminated against. But I think John McWhorter is right. I think that we have to work around these people. I think a lot of them are not persuadable, and you've got to work around them. And as I was saying at the beginning of the podcast, you've got to treat them like equals. And that means when you are discriminated against, you write it down. You keep a record. If they give you any paperwork or any handouts that has discriminatory language, you hang on to them. if you get
And
any
those
emails,
recordings, those audios and video
if you
recordings of
can
these sessions.
record things,
Yeah.
because you are going to have to, if you can, if you are in a position to be able to do it, you've got to turn it over to the human resources department. And most likely, somebody in their human resources department is going to be a millennial who's trained in pedagogy of the oppressed, who believes
Right.
exactly what you said, James. Oh, there's no such thing as, reverse discrimination. This human resources person isn't going to understand the law, and they're going to make a huge mistake, and they're going to try to fight back with their activism, and then they're
Yeah.
going to be in deep trouble. But James, if people don't take action, you're going to lose your civil rights. And if
Yeah.
you lose your civil rights, James, everybody loses their civil rights. If you
Agreed.
lose your free speech rights, everybody loses their free speech rights. I could
I think
say,
people need to pay attention to what's going on in Britain, where somebody retweets something that is considered to be transphobic. They didn't even, whatever, they just, whatever. And the police show up at their door and take them away in cuffs in front of the neighborhood. They're policing language,
well, what
literally.
people don't understand is that in the UK, they actually don't have free speech. We do in the United States.
Yeah, we do for now.
Today, we have it today.
Yeah. And it's very important to me that even if you're wrong, I'm willing to be wrong. I learned a mantra from one of my cabaret artists that I work with. Failure is always an option. So tell me what your next project is, because I loved watching. There's a great, and I'm going to include links to all of this stuff. Kevin Ray works, because you're creating your own work, and right now I need the encouragement. I need to hear your story, a little bit of your creative story before I let you go,
So,
because I'm doing this cabaret act called Lived Experience, and it's this first time I've been on stage in New York in 8 years, and I haven't been as myself because I'm a character guy. I'm singing as myself, and kind of it's very vulnerable. So you're devising theater. There's a great documentary about this E.M Forster story that you adapted into this really interesting piece. Tell us a little bit about that inspiration. I'm going to direct people to that and what your next project is.
So, as I was telling you before, I was doing networking and trying to see if I could get myself some kind of opportunity to assistant direct or to be in the theater in some way. And I went to an event, and it was 4 directors, and it was 3 artistic directors talking. And my plan was network. So at the end of this event, go up and talk to those artistic directors, say your name, meet them. At the end of the event, one of the artistic directors stood up and he said, I don't hire any directors whose work I haven't seen. And I don't hire any directors who haven't seen work at my theater. And I went, there's no reason to network with them. There's no reason to network with any of them. They're not going to hire you. So your choice is make your own work or don't do anything. And because I had a background in devising theater with young people, I was like, wait a minute, I know how to make something up.
Yeah.
It's difficult to get people involved in a project if it's amorphous. So I thought, you know what, maybe you could devise starting from a story. What stories interest you that are in the public domain that you could do something with? There's a website called Project Gutenberg. And on Project
Yes.
Gutenberg, it has all kinds of literature that's in the public domain that you could do anything you want with it. So I was like, well, what interests and excites you? And I was interested in, I thought, a theatrical piece about ghost stories would be really fun, because how do you put a ghost on stage? What are the theatrical conventions that you could use? How can you use acting and light and sound and all of the ways that the stage speaks to convince an audience that a ghost has appeared on the stage? So I was looking through Project Gutenberg at old ghost stories and sort of following through who wrote what and what's the history of Gothic literature. And then I found out that Edith Wharton, who wrote The Age of Innocence, she also had she wrote I think like 86 short stories, but 14 or 15 of them are specifically ghost stories. So I thought,
Really?
this is
Okay.
interesting. Yeah. I thought, what if I take a couple of these stories and put them together and let me call up some design collaborators that I know from college and see if they want to go in together on writing a grant application. And they said yes. And there was sometimes I think some resistance, like, oh, that's old stuff. We're not supposed to be, there's a lot of myopia going around right now. There's a lot of self-focus in me and right now. And what I was looking at is, wait a minute, a lot of the things we're experiencing are things that have happened before. And these people
Right.
have gotten through this and they've come out the other
Yes.
side. So there were some things in the Edith Wharton ghost stories that were similar to what was happening with us.
Wow.
They were on board, and then we submitted a couple grant applications. We were told no a couple of times, then we finally got one in the middle of the pandemic.
Wow.
Um, it, and it was coming around the time, right around the time when the first vaccines came out. So I think we were all sort of feeling like, oh, it's going to be over. It's going to be over. And I called up a bunch of actors that I knew from college. And I said, hey, we're going to do a project. Would you like to do it? And they were like, yes, anything. We want to do something. And it just so happened that summer of 2021, it was right after the first vaccines were released and right before Omicron. There was a window of time where we could rehearse and do a show.
Wow. Oh my God.
And we rehearsed in the room. We went through, we were in that period of like, everybody's got to be vaccinated and wearing masks and this and that, which was tricky, but we worked it out. And then we did the show. And we were like, hey, wait a minute. This is working out. Before the show even opened, I said to my primary collaborators, I said, if this is interesting to you and you want to do another one, I know a short story by E.M Forster that's about technology and what is our relationship to technology and what might happen if we give all of our responsibilities over to technology. If we let technology do everything for us. In the machine stops, everybody lives in their own room. They all communicate with each other through a video interface. He came up with this in 1907.
How did this escape me? I love Forster's novels. This has totally escaped me.
Well, part of the project is, and this sort of includes the third project that we're doing, is what I'm looking at, because it happened to me, like just like you were saying, people came to the show and they said, I had no idea Edith Wharton wrote ghost stories. People came to the machine stops and said, I had no idea E.M Forster wrote a science fiction.
It makes sense for that period.
Yes. There's a lot of literature out there that people don't know about. And this is a way to use theater to introduce people to something that they don't know about. I will say that these are not adaptations in the sense that we're taking the story and then twisting and doing something different.
Right.
What I am trying to do is look at what is it that the author wrote, what is the intention, and how can we use the language of the stage to express it? So how do we use dialogue and scenic design and lighting design and sound and movement and puppetry and sort of do it all together with the designers in the rehearsal room at the beginning of the process so that they become part of the DNA of the piece. It's hard because, we don't have a lot of money. So, it's I have to present it to people as, I can give you a small stipend if you want to participate in this project with me. And we can do it together. It's, this is a kind of thing. Do you live to work or do you work to live?
People are hungry to create stuff. They are right now. I am.
I'd love to make a living as a theater director. I don't know that that's ever going to happen. So you know what? I have to put on my big boy pants and I have to get myself a job, which I have. I still, work as a teaching artist, and that is my job, and that's how I earn a living. And then I do this when I can. And so, with my collaborators, we do have to make an agreement, like, how much time can you commit? When can you come? Can we do this at a time that we can all make it? It's a lot of negotiating, and that's why, we plan things out very far in advance. The next piece that we're doing is an adaptation of a science fiction story by a Russian dissident named Yevgeny Zamyatin.
Okay.
Yevgeny Zamyatin wrote a science fiction novel called We, and We, George Orwell read We, and he used it as the basis for 1984.
Wow.
1984 is mostly about the manipulation of language. We is more about Zamyatin's experience as a Bolshevik who left the party when the party said all art must be useful to the movement.
Right.
Zamyatin said, you cannot have a healthy arts culture without heretics. You need people who are artists that speak out against norms. You have to have that. And we're not allowed to have that right now.
Right. So
particularly in the theater in New York, you know?
Well, that's anywhere. Theater anywhere. So this is fascinating to me because I'm just going to mirror back to you. I think this is so inspiring, and it's inspiring for me. It will be for more people who are listening. You reached this impasse about 10 years ago of deep depression, of a feeling of loss and failure, and know where to go and what was the point. And what I'm hearing is that in your creative work now, you're combining all of the best of those experiences that you had that informed you, that work in the classroom, in school with the designers, and you're infusing it with the passion that you have to shine a light on these movements and these diseases in our cultural world right now that you're passionate about. So it sounds to me like you're nailing it, Kevin. Like you're taking, because that's the thing. This is the reason why I'm doing a cabaret called Lived Experience. Everyone has a story. Everyone has a life. And when you get to our age-ish, this is supposed to be the time where we reap what we sowed. And all of our experiences, good, bad, or indifferent, the things we've overcome, almost more than anything else, are there and fresh, and we've got the ability and the insight and the artistry and craft to attack it all and to express it for the good of others. I feel this. I don't know about you, but it sounds like that's what you're doing.
During the first couple of weeks of the pandemic, because of the way my job is, I'm on the subway every day going to different schools in different boroughs. So when everything first got shut down with the pandemic, I didn't know if I was carrying COVID or not. I didn't know if I was going to die or not. It was really scary, as I'm sure you remember. It was very, very scary. And that spring, I said to myself, I said, Kevin, if you survive this, you've got to live the rest of your life for joy and fulfillment. Because if you can find joy and fulfillment, you'll spread that to others. You have to live your life for that. This project, whenever the project has been happening, has definitely brought me joy and fulfillment. All of the designers I work with, all of the actors I work with are lovely, talented, fun. Because they knew me before all of this stuff went down, they didn't come to rehearsal with distrust, and they didn't come to rehearsal expecting, all of this other political stuff to happen. Over the course of time, though, James, I will say I got some really good advice from another artist, and she said to me, Kevin, because at a certain point I was bringing on some new collaborators, and she said, Kevin, you've got to be upfront with people. If you're not doing critical social justice activism in the rehearsal room, you've got to tell them that before they come in the room, to give them the opportunity to say no to you. And what I say to them every time, and this is what I believe, James, I think anybody can run any rehearsal room any way they want, as long as they're not, physically harming or beating people. It's your choice how you want to run that room. If you're the type of artist who's really committed to social justice activism, I think that's great for you. And I think you can run that rehearsal room as long as everybody else is in agreement with it. You can run that rehearsal room that way. You can create a critical social justice activist play. That is absolutely fine. And I support that. However, it's important for anybody to know that I'm not running my rehearsal room that way.
Right.
Nor should I have to.
Nope.
And
Well,
nobody
you
should
don't
come into
have
the
to.
rehearsal. Well, but I have to tell them in advance that I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
Because
It's
if
good
they
that you
just
do that.
came from an environment where that's happening, they're going to
Yeah.
be expecting it to happen in my room. And when it doesn't
Well,
happen in my room, they're going to get upset, which I
if
understand.
it were a
So I'm
union piece, you wouldn't be able to run that room that way.
no,
If it were union actors, you wouldn't be able to do that.
that's a problem.
It is a problem. Yes.
But I'll tell you what, James. So I've said this to people. Nobody's turned me down. This summer, I met some new actors, and I'll tell you, everybody's got a story about how they've come up against some form of critical social justice activism, and nobody likes it.
Are you
Nobody likes
noticing
it.
now, though, that you can have conversations like the last show I did? A couple of the other principal actors, we were of like mind. And the first night we went out to dinner, and I had a couple glasses of Chardonnay, which is never a good thing. And I was sort of expressing my views, and the two of them looked at each other and went, "Oh my God, yes, thank God, he thinks the way we do. We can have a conversation." It's like people are a little bit more willing to reach out to each other or to connect with each other and talk about these things
What I'm
out of the work.
observing is that one-on-one, people will talk about it, and they'll try to find a way to let you know in a sideways way. Like they'll
Yeah.
try to sort of drop a clue and see if you'll pick up on it. And then when you let them know it's okay, I'll let you talk about anything. I mean, like, James, I remember watching Divine movies. Like those,
Yeah.
like, and who cared? Like, who cares what you say? Like, it's not that big of a deal.
Not at
We
all.
have to agree to disagree.
That's right. I have never felt like I was going to get damaged by listening to somebody sound off in a way that disgusted me. It may have riled me up and got me pissed off. But you cannot. These kids, I worry about the kids. I worry about not the little kids, because the little kids I think may evolve to be a little bit more grounded. I hope. But the kids who are like teenagers and young adults now, I worry about them because they have so much anxiety around this. They're so afraid of saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing or not appearing to be cool with some things that are clearly uncomfortable for the majority of them. And it's turned them very neurotic and very vigilant of themselves, hypervigilant of themselves, and very depressed and anxious. And I worry about that very much, because it's psychologically, it's so damaging to that.
Well,
To have that.
what I can do, James, is I can offer a rehearsal space where they can come into the room and they can be actors and they can pretend to be a character who is not themselves doing something that they wouldn't do. And I'm not going to ask them questions about their gender. I'm not going to ask them questions about their race. I'm not going to ask them questions about their sexual orientation.
Right.
If they want to bring it, when we were doing the machine stops, E.M Forster was closeted almost his whole life.
Yeah.
You and I were talking about Morris, which was also, I remember seeing the Morris film too.
Oh my God.
He wouldn't let that get published until after he died. He sent it to Christopher Isherwood.
Okay.
He sent it to him in an envelope, and it arrived after his death. And
For
because he
those
knew
of you who
Christopher
don't
Isherwood
know,
would get it published.
oh my God. Well, for those of you who don't know, and I highly recommend E.M Forster, who wrote Howard's End, wrote this book, Morris. I didn't know. Thank you for clarifying this. But it's a really, really beautiful novel about a young man who's gay, and it ends happily with him running away with this gamekeeper on his friend's estate. It ends happily. It's a lovely romance. It works out real good. And it didn't get published until the 70s. And they made a movie of it with Hugh Grant and James Wilby. And this is one of those great costume epics. And for someone like me, I was just out of college and I was this young out gay artist. I was like, oh my God, it's like this romantic epic novel, brought to the screen, and it ends happily. Well, for one of the guys, it ends happily. But wow, yeah.
But James, the things that you and I went through, having been alive during the AIDS crisis, I remember for me having been alive in 1992 when Pat Buchanan got up at the Republican National Convention and said horrible things about gay men and lesbian women. that gave us a kind of armor
Yeah.
that millennials and Gen Zs don't have because they've been coddled their whole lives. And they've been
Yeah.
taught that words are violence. They don't have it.
Yeah.
So of course they don't understand.
Yeah. Well, I think you're being a force for good. I love the space you're creating. I think it's a lesson. I think it's a lesson for people. I think it's a good example for people to know that, yeah, if you're a leader and you're creating theater and you're independent, I think there's going to be a lot of independent work going on. Hopefully there's sources of funding because God knows none of us have any money. But I think it's good for people to know and to consider, to contemplate that you're creating a collaborative space, but you're the leader, you're the guide, and you can set the parameters for what is going to be in that space and not abide by some arbitrary idea. Because frankly, the idea of safe space to me is the opposite. And social social justice is antisocial and unjust most of the time. So these contradictions are not lost on me. And they're not on you. And what I love is that you are giving people a place to express themselves and to create and collaborate using their own individual talents in different disciplines, and you're making it come together with a purpose. I couldn't admire you more, Kevin. I think that what you're doing is extraordinary. How do people find you? And we're going to have lots of links to send them to see some of your work online. I think it's so exciting. I just love it. And where we can see your next collaboration. So whatever you want to plug it.
I have a website, and the website is kevinrayworks.com. You can follow me on Instagram, which is also at kevinrayworks with an S. And those are the two places so far. I don't do X, the app formerly known as Twitter. I think it's just poison. I stay away.
I haven't been on it in years. It's just ugly, and I used to rise to the bait too much, and it's impossible. Yeah. It's so toxic. That is fantastic.
No, but we do. I do. I had to make a decision about the social media, what I was going to put out on the social media, and I made a commitment that it's only stuff about the show. It's not stuff about any holidays. It's not stuff about Gay Pride Month. It is only about the show. So if you want to see pictures of the show, if you want to know when the next show is going to happen, if you want to know quotes from the authors so that you can get introduced to them, that stuff will be there, but there won't be any other stuff that is not related to the show.
I hear you. You've got to protect yourself. And you've also got, I think one of the great things about social media and about the internet in general is it's like any force. It's like any power. You can abuse it or you can use it the way you can channel it the way you want to channel it, have people see what you want them to see. And that can be for good, very much for good. Kevin Ray, keep up your good works. Kevin Ray works. He is working and he's creating work that I think is really valuable. And I encourage people to take a look at the video that Kevin did, which I think is so brave in the best sense. And when I say brave, I mean not many of us are speaking up, and Kevin is. And he's putting his money where his mouth is and using his talents and his creativity and his passion to move things into a better place. So thank you for everything you do, Kevin, and thank you for joining me on the Cornfield.
Thank you so much for having me, and congratulations on the podcast. And I'm looking forward to seeing some lived experience. I'll be there. What's the date of lived experience? When is it?
Well, thank you for plugging my show. Lived experience. Of course. Has two initial performances here in New York City at the Triad Theater at Thursdays, October 19th and 26th at 9:30 p.m. The 26th is my birthday. We're going to be live streaming that show, so I'll give you information on how you can view that wherever you are. Or please join us in person, get your 2-drink minimum, and put some sequins on and boogie with us at the Triad Theater. The show's about, what do we do after the last 3 years and what's next and what the possibilities are. And I think you know me well enough by now to know, I think life is full of possibility. And life is a banquet and most poor suckers are starving to death. So stay tuned, stay strong, and we'll see you next time in the Cornfield. Bye-bye.